Healthcare is too expensive. Employers are offsetting costs onto their employees. Who will make health benefits affordable for hard-working Americans and their families?
You will! This is the Empowering Plans Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you once again emphasize the benefits in your benefit plan. Now prepare to learn,
Plan,
save,
and protect with the FIA Group.
Welcome, everyone, to the Empowering Plans Podcast. My name is Corey Crigger. Happy to be with you today. Today, I'm joined by Kendall Jackson. Kendall, how are you doing today?
Good. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here on this podcast with you. And you know what else I'm excited about? I love the fall. It is my favorite season of the year. I don't know how it is up there in Boston, but the leaves are changing here. It's cold in the morning, kind of miserable in the afternoon. You get in your car, it's super hot. How's the weather up north treating you right now, Kendall?
It's nice. It's chilly here as well, but the leaves are changing color. Everything's red and yellow and orange. It's really beautiful.
Something that I have not made it up. I've been at FIA for 5 years, have not made it up in the fall yet. Been in the spring, summer, winter. Got to get up there to see the leaves on the trees.
Yeah.
I know it's beautiful up there.
Yeah, you got to come up here.
And, with the fall, you start to get into holiday season, right? And holiday season, maybe it starts at Labor Day, maybe not. But I think we can all get on board with Halloween kicks off really the end of the year holiday season here, Kendall. And I didn't think that we could do a podcast this close to Halloween. We're recording this on the 23rd of October. This should be coming out end of the week, right before Halloween. I think we got to talk about candy. It's the best part of Halloween. And I'm going to cheat because, I sent you an outline over here and I said, let's pick our favorite trick or treat candies. But being a man who enjoys candy, I'm actually going to do a list. But Kendall, what is your go-to? You see the bowl, you see the assortment of candies. What are you gravitating towards here?
Always chocolate. My preference would always be a Twix bar. I'll also give you a list. Second would be Kit Kat. Third would be Hershey. And bonus points if they give the big bars.
Oh, number one, if you're not giving out big bars, take a moment, look in the mirror and ask you, do you not want the children in your neighborhood to like you? Do you want to risk eggs, TP, light vandalism? Give out the big bars, dig deep. I know inflation's bad. We'll talk about that in a second, but you got to give out the big bars. And I think you cheated, and I think you looked at my list because I'm a sucker for caramel. Twix bars, number one probably for me. Milky Way, Snickers, off the beaten path a little bit, and I just tried this candy bar. I blame my mom for this. I was visiting with her over the weekend. They have chocolate dipped Payday bars now. So it's the Payday bar with the peanuts and the caramel dipped in chocolate because you need that, obviously. Those are delicious. As long as you didn't say black licorice, I wasn't going to fight you. But if you're a licorice fan and you are listening to this podcast, just turn it off. We don't even want you to listen. We don't even want you. I'm kidding. We want everyone to listen. But black licorice, terrible. I will die on that hill. Black jelly beans the same way. Kendall, do you have a Halloween memory that stands out to you? Growing up in the rural part of the country, I don't know. I think I kind of missed the boat on Halloween. It was never my favorite. It was good. You get free candy and whatever, but I feel like in the city and in bigger areas, Halloween's a bigger deal. What's your childhood experience with Halloween? Pro, con?
It was always really fun. I was lucky enough that my mom was really involved and she always made our Halloween costumes from scratch. So we'd go to Walmart and pick out the patterns for it and the fabric, and then she would sew it up for whatever we wanted to be that year. So always good memories for me. Yeah.
That is excellent. That is an awesome tradition. And, with us, we got the 4 little ones at home. I really am into the traditions now. I was an only child growing up, so it's kind of like, it's whatever. If I wasn't into it, what was the point, right? But pumpkin carving, doing a pumpkin patch. We took our kids to the pumpkin patch this past weekend. It was great. They loved it. Picked out their pumpkins. We're going to carve them this weekend. Going to paint some. So I'm trying to do a little bit better with my kids because my kids are very into it. We usually do family costumes. So this year is the first time that we're not all going to be matching because my oldest wants to be Snow White, my middle wants to be Ghosty Spider. The twins are small. They're going to be like Pooh Bear characters. And I think I'm going to end up in a Spider-Man outfit, which no one really wants to see. No one's asking for it. No one wants it. But my middle child wants me to be Spider-Man to match her outfit. So I don't know.
That's awesome. That'll be fun.
Yeah, it will be a scary sight. Speaking of scary things, seamless segue. It is Halloween time. We're here. We are at the FIA Group, and we thought the best thing for us to talk about with Halloween next week is things in the self-funded industry that might be spooky. things that might be scaring you. I think Kendall's going to talk a little bit about things that might scare you from a economic perspective when it comes to your health plan out there. I'm going to talk about a couple different topics, and we're just going to, do a little debrief on things that we think that you should be aware of, and maybe knowledge is power. Maybe we can help ease some fears around some of these concerning topics. Kendall, how about I'll lead us off, then I'll throw to you, and then we'll see if we have time for my last one. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. Take it away.
Excellent. Well, the first thing that we want to talk about, and I don't even know how many of you know this, Kendall, you might not know this. I just saw last week for the first time, there's a presidential election coming up this year. Who knew? Apparently it's happening. Of course, I'm joking. It's all that you see anywhere. Living in a moderate swing state, I get a lot of ads. I was talking to a coworker from up your way, Kendall, in Massachusetts, and I don't think you get as many national ads being in Massachusetts, but around here, being close to Ohio, we get a lot of ads because we're kind of a swing state in Kentucky, but not really. And the outcome of the election can be scary. Implications for the healthcare system can be a little scary. I'm not going to retread everything. If you want an exhaustive kind of breakdown of the election, I really have to plug the last webinar that FIA did. You can go there for an hour-long session on the election and some of the party platforms. But I do think it's important. I believe this will be the last podcast that comes out before the election. The election is changing. The forecasts are changing day by day, and the candidates, some of their policies are changing day by day. We wanted to repeal and replace a few years ago. Now we're kind of okay with it. Some of us wanted single payer. Now we're backing off of that. So the race is ever changing. So I want to give just a brief update where we are as of October 23rd with the polls. And all these numbers are coming from Real Clear Politics, if there's any fact checkers out here. With the most recent updated poll dating, we got Kamala Harris up a point and some change nationally, and Trump leading in the battleground aggregate by 1.2 points on aggregate throughout the battleground states. And those are Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. Looks like Trump has got some momentum. And for those of you who are bettors, the betting market has about a 60-40 breakdown towards Trump. That's right now. Now, I say that when I sent the outline for this podcast last night, between then and now, 3 news stories broke about some October surprises. So I'm not going to address those, but we have some anonymous sources, and we have former chief of staff coming on record saying some things about former President Trump. So you never know which way this race is going to go. But I do think it's important to get just a little snapshot, the most recent things that each campaign has said about their healthcare policies, right? So we'll do a little snapshot on here. One thing that I think has been really fascinating with this election cycle is the rise in popularity of candidates going on podcasts. It was actually just announced last night that Donald Trump is going to be on the Joe Rogan podcast on Friday. That's probably why he declined to come on this podcast. It's unfortunate we got snubbed by Joe Rogan. Kamala Harris just had an appearance on a very popular podcast, second most popular podcast on Spotify. She made that appearance last month, a podcast called Call Her Daddy. And JD Vance appeared on a podcast called This Past Weekend, which is the comedian Theo Vaughn's podcast. I was able to catch a few pieces of that last night, and they parked on the healthcare topic for about 30 minutes on that podcast. And I thought it was very good, worth the listen. And one of the things that Vance talked a lot about was price transparency. He actually referenced Bernie Sanders' appearance on that same podcast a few months ago, talking about a need for price transparency, how this is an issue that has bipartisan support, and part of a second Trump administration would be more enforcement around price transparency. Again, JD Vance uses some of the analogies that we've always heard of. You can go to Starbucks, you know the size of your drink, you know how much you're going to pay for it, and then you pay for it and you get it. Healthcare doesn't operate like that. And he also told a great story that I hadn't heard before about his wife delivering their second child, I believe, where she had to select a anesthesiologist for the epidural like a couple hours before delivery. No one talked to her about whether or not this was in or out of network. This was before the No Surprises Act. She chooses an anesthesiologist to administer the epidural. They deliver the baby, and then 2 months later, they got a $15,000 balance bill because the anesthesiologist was out of network. So this is something that does have bipartisan support. It's on the forefront of the Trump campaign. I alluded a little earlier that we went from 2016 to a repeal and replace of the ACA. All the Trump surrogates are backing off that position. I don't think that that's a winning position for them now. But price transparency is a big topic that they want to expand and that they want to continue to providing those type of protections. They touched on a little bit prescription costs. Vance cited a study showing that U.S. pays 2.7 times what European nations do for generic prescriptions and 3.2 times what Europeans pay for name brand prescription drugs. And he mentioned a Trump policy where, listen, if Sweden's only going to pay $278 on average for a prescription and Americans are going to pay $1,000 per year for prescriptions, let's just re-import from Sweden prescription drugs as a way to bring costs down. Now, that has some implications. There's a reason that Americans pay markup is a lot of that money, if you listen to big pharma lobbyists, goes to development and research. So we'll see where that goes, but it's at least at the forefront and a talking point. For the Harris campaign, she is talking about expanding Affordable Care Act protections. She's talking about that a lot on the stump. It's a big section on her website, which I believe is, I don't want to give out the wrong link, but if you just Google Kamala Harris, her official campaign policy has a huge chunk on expanding ACA protections. She also wants to expand the insulin cap protections of $35 and $2,000 maximum a year instead of just Medicare recipients, for that to be all Americans. And then a big thing that I think is going to be appealing to a lot of families out there, and something that, I can get behind, medical debt. Medical debt has to be dealt with in some way. I think this is an issue that has bipartisan support. It's the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States. A lot of this has been helped a little bit by the No Surprise Act. At least the burden is falling on payers and providers for the administrative portion of IDR and open negotiations, but at least families aren't being balance billed for thousands of dollars like JD's example was. We've removed medical debt from credit reports, and then there's a move for the Harris campaign of canceling medical debt for certain citizens and giving more monetary relief to those who are under soul-crushing medical debt. So I would say healthcare is not on the forefront right now. Obviously, inflation, the economy, and some world affairs are the forefront of the campaigns, but it's definitely something that they're still talking about. So we'll keep an eye on that, keep an eye out for FIA stuff. And again, for an exhaustive look at the campaign and at each platform, check out that FIA webinar that came out, I think, 2 weeks ago. It was really good, really informative. Kendall, what do you have? What's scaring you? What do you think that we could talk about here to give some information?
Yeah, so we have two bigger topics that we're constantly seeing on the consulting side over here, and that's weight loss drugs, which are GLP-1s, and gene therapy. So we're going to talk about both of those. There's a lot of parallels between the two in terms of recommendations that we have, but also the concerns that we see with both. So we'll talk about each individually, but you're going to see that there's a lot of similarities here. We'll start with weight loss drugs. So generally, there's going to be a lot of discretion on the plan side of whether or not they want to choose to cover or exclude these drugs. Now, the biggest factor we see here is cost. These weight loss drugs are extremely expensive. When you look at Ozempic, Wegovy, those types of drugs are very, very expensive, up to the thousands of dollars per month. So really big implications there for the plan from a cost perspective. There's also a significant risk when you think about stop loss gaps. There's opportunity for stop loss to not reimburse these drugs if they don't meet certain medical necessity criteria, if they're being used off label, if they're not FDA approved for a specific use. These are all concerns that we want to think about if they're going to be covered by the plan. We don't have stop loss coverage there. So we want to just make sure that any off-label drug use is accounted for with plan language that supports that. We want to make sure that there's nothing in the stop loss policy that would exclude those drugs from being used off-label if the plan decides to pay for them. And then just another little side note for stop loss, just making sure that any mid-year plan changes are relayed to your carrier. We want to make sure that reviewing and approving those changes made to your plan document, because otherwise the policy is only going to be applicable to the plan document before those changes were made. So we want to just make sure that the carrier is approving those plan changes. But if your plan does decide that it wants to cover weight loss drugs, we see it really mainly for two reasons: either just because the employer wants to provide more robust benefits, or because they're trying to think long-term benefits for the plan. If you alleviate any issues with obesity early on by having weight loss drugs, you may be saving plan funds in the long term by reducing the health risks that are exacerbated by obesity. So those are the main reasons we see plans sort of wanting to cover these drugs. But I think the trend is definitely that most plans want to exclude them. So we'll talk about that alternative next. If you're going to limit weight loss drugs, you want to make sure that the exclusion is applied uniformly and it's not targeting a specific individual or group of similarly situated individuals based on the health factor. because that's going to implicate HIPAA, and we want to avoid any issues with discrimination. We'll definitely see that if you implement an exclusion in response to an individual's new diagnosis, which may necessitate a particular weight loss drug. Now, if you implement that exclusion in response to a diagnosis, that change will be discriminatory under HIPAA, so you're going to face some issues there. Now, there is sort of a safe harbor under HIPAA that a plan change will be presumed to not be discriminatory if it's made effective at the start of the next normal plan year. So our advice to plans is if you don't currently exclude GLP-1s or weight loss drugs and you want to implement that exclusion, we recommend making that exclusion effective at the start of the next normal plan year to sort of avoid any potential issues with HIPAA and discrimination under HIPAA. And also just making sure that any exclusion surrounding weight loss drugs is unambiguous and clear. We want to make sure our language is really, really streamlined for what we want to do and what we want to accomplish for the plan. We've seen plans before have too broad of an exclusion for weight loss services, and we run into issues there because we still have to remember that obesity screenings are preventive care under the ACA, and all plans are required to cover those without cost sharing. So if we have too broad of an exclusion applying to all weight loss services, then we're going to run into issues because we're going to be excluding care that is required under the ACA. So really making sure our language is clear of what we're excluding if we want to exclude weight loss drugs, making sure that's unambiguous in the plan. And gene therapy, we're going to see a lot of similarities here. Again, just the same as we had for weight loss drugs. If you want to exclude gene therapy, you can. If you want to cover it, you can. There's no federal requirement for either type of drug that it be covered, but it is an option to cover it. And so if the plan does want to cover gene therapies, then the language must be written to not mistakenly fall within another plan exclusion. This is something that we sort of caution plans, because just because you don't have an exclusion for gene therapy doesn't mean you don't have any other language there in your plan that could sort of present problems. Generally, gene and cell therapies are new. They're constantly changing. There's a lot of new advances sort of week to week, month to month on these therapies. And we don't always know their impact or effectiveness. A lot of that can sort of be unclear at times. So it's very possible that a therapy could be considered experimental or investigational or not medically necessary under the plan. And if your plan has an exclusion for E&I or not medically necessary, then you could end up excluding those gene therapies under those exclusions when you would otherwise want to cover these therapies. So just making sure you're looking at your plan language, making sure if you do have E&I and medical necessity exclusions, making sure that those exclusions operate to still allow for coverage for gene therapy if you so choose to do that. Similarly to weight loss drugs, the cost of gene therapies are potentially very, very high, extremely high in some cases, close to $1 million for some drugs. So huge implications with covering these drugs. So just wanting to make sure you have clear plan language so the employers are properly prepared. While the costs may be initially really high for employers, we see some employers wanting to cover gene therapy for the same reason they want to cover weight loss drugs. A very high expense now may alleviate any longer term, maybe chronic care and expenses that are needed later on by sort of addressing the root cause of the problem now and not having to address symptoms later down the line. So that's sort of a pro in maybe covering gene therapies, is that you sort of avoid any bigger costs down the line and you're really just focusing on addressing the issue right now. Now, similar to weight loss drugs, we also have to consider stop loss when we're talking about gene therapy. It's very likely that the stop loss policy has exclusions for treatments that are not medically necessary. So there's the potential for gaps in coverage there on the stop loss front. So considering the cost of these treatments tend to be really high, we just want to make sure the plan is prepared and covered. So just making sure you consult with your carrier ahead of time to avoid any gaps in coverage if you're going to choose to cover gene therapy. We want to make sure it's possible for reimbursement from the carrier so that we don't have any catastrophic claims for the plan. Now, alternatively, we see a lot of plans choosing to exclude gene therapy due to the significant costs of these drugs. And so when it comes to exclusion, again, self-funded plans have a broad discretion when setting up their benefit structures. Now, because they have this broad discretion, we see not only people excluding gene therapies within their plans, but also even specialty drugs in general entirely. We sometimes caution plans and sort of try and show them the results of doing that. That may not be so obvious at the beginning. We don't really ever see the approach employed of excluding specialty drugs entirely, because while the avoidance of these costly drugs is very appealing for employers to protect the plan, it's sort of inevitable that sometimes participants may be left with no coverage whatsoever for treatments that may be their only option. It's very possible that a participant could have some illness or disease where a gene therapy is their only option for treatment. And so a categorical exclusion of gene therapies would really limit them in what they can do for treatment for their disease. We also have the same HIPAA concerns with gene therapy as we do with weight loss. So when we're making an exclusion, we want to make sure the exclusion is not implemented in regards to targeting an individual with a specific diagnosis based on a health factor, utilizing that same safe harbor and making sure that we're implementing that exclusion at the start of the next plan year, not mid-plan year, sort of avoiding the presumption that it is discriminatory. Yeah, so those are the main concerns that we see in those two areas. And it's really a constantly evolving space. And it's something we constantly get asked more questions about. And sort of as this evolves, we'll definitely let people know. So please feel free to send in any questions you have, any language you have, if you have exclusionary language that you want us to look at or how that relates to the rest of your benefit plan, feel free to send that over. We're always happy to look that over here on the consulting side. So with that, Corey, I'll turn it back to you if you want to talk quickly about AI in healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent information there, Kendall. And one thing that I've learned, gene therapy is a huge topic. All the conferences that I've been at this past year talking about it. And one thing that people also need to kind of consider is what the success rate is on these treatments. Like you're talking about $1 million a pop for some of these gene therapies and a 20 to 25% likelihood of success. I think that, and I'm not going to quote the name of the drug nor the disease, but I believe like one of the gene therapies coming out for hemophilia has like an 18 to 20% success rate. And the plan's still going to be on the hook for paying for it and for a 1 in 5 chance that it may work. So that's a huge concern moving forward. A lot of great information there. Send your questions to our wonderful informed team over at PGC if you have any questions related to GLP-1 or gene therapy or any consulting type question that when it comes to your plan. AI in healthcare. I'm going to end with this. If only we had an iconic piece of American culture that would warn us of the dangers of unparalleled AI access, maybe something that starred Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't know. It terrifies me. Kendall, did you see the Tesla Optimus from earlier this month? Did you see any of the videos coming out from that?
I did, and it's wild. I didn't think we'd be there that quickly. Very advanced stuff.
For those of you who don't know, I would encourage you to take 5 minutes, go to YouTube, search the Tesla Optimus if you haven't seen this. Elon Musk had an unveiling party where he had robot bartenders that were making conversation, small talk, taking drink orders, going in and getting the drinks, mixing the drinks, and returning them to the patrons. It is wild what we are doing and how quickly we are doing it with AI here. We could talk about AI in general, but I'm going to go real quickly through an article that was recently published by Johnson & Johnson. This is on the Johnson & Johnson website about how they look to be leveraging AI in the future as it pertains to healthcare. And I do think a lot of these things are good, right? AI can be scary. You could talk about job replacement. You could talk about world domination. But there's also a lot of great things that come along with AI, right? One of the things that they talked about in this article is operating room efficiency and training. How if you have AI recording transcription and then algorithms to be able to watch a surgery or a procedure, the AI will then be able to recap the high points of the procedure, rewatch significant moments, and then synthesize that and editorialize the video so that surgeons, either medical students or seasoned surgeons that just want to sharpen their craft, would be able to use that as a training tool to see, hey, this is what went right on this surgery the last 100 times you performed it. These are the things that maybe you could do better on. Using AI to improve surgical outcomes, I think that's a wonderful thing. Speed to discovery of breakthrough drugs. A lot of these breakthrough drugs, to develop medicines, you really have to figure out what biological and genetic variations in a certain person causes diseases or causes a higher likelihood for a disease to present in a particular patient. And with the advancement in AI and the advancement in the algorithms, you're going to be able to apply medical data sets, de-identified medical data sets like health records, lab results, sequencing data, and be able to spit out gigabytes of information in such a short amount of time to be able to isolate what genetic variations cause disease and then be able to treat those diseases. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful advancement in AI. Personalized healthcare, right? Like I remember 5, 6, 7 years ago, Amazon talking about getting into just big health data collection so that they can look at trends, what certain populations have in common where diseases are frequent that might not be caught by the naked eye, but when you're crunching big data sets, you'll be able to see what people in different states have in common, what you are susceptible for based on your own genetic makeup and your own biology, and being able to maybe get ahead of diseases that are hereditary or that you have a predisposition for that you wouldn't even know that you had a genetic predisposition for. And then, of course, helping in being able to research drugs, find better applicants for clinical trials based on all those medical data records and big data collection that's going on. I think all those are wonderful breakthroughs in the medical industry. And I joke about the pitfalls of AI, but there's so many wonderful portions of it. I think that it's just one of those things where, do you want to be the person who's railing against the internet, or do you want to get on board and learn how to use it? And I think that this is what we're faced at as a company, as a society. AI is only going to continue to get more advanced, better. And how are we going to leverage that to provide services in the healthcare space, in the cost containment space, or in your own job out there in podcast land, whether you're a broker, whether you're a plan admin, whether you're at a TPA, how can you use these levers to make your day better? And how can you be more efficient and provide value to your clients? I think that it's time to get on board before the train leaves the station. With all that, Kendall, do you have any closing thoughts here before we let people get on with their day?
No, that's all I have. I hope everybody has a good holiday season. And you too as well.
Absolutely. Halloween is our CEO, Adam Russo's favorite holiday. He has a lot of great stories about why it is, and it really goes to the heart of the FIA mission of giving back, giving to those who are less fortunate. So Halloween, near and dear to his heart, near and dear to FIA's heart. Everyone enjoy it. Have a safe Halloween out there. Hopefully we didn't scare you too much with all these changes, with all these things going on. And we just hope everyone has a nice, safe Halloween. And we'll see you next time on the Empowering Plans podcast.